Hey everybody, I'm Zoe.
And I'm Chandi.
And this is Bound by the Cloak. There are so many factors that go into how people parent their children. Generational shifts, changes in the education system, family values, and even social pressures. Parenting can also be influenced by some of the current societal trends that we go through.
In this episode, we're joined by Nicole Runyon, a nationally recognized psychotherapist, parenting expert, and author of the upcoming book, Free to Fly: The Secret to Fostering Independence in the Next Generation. With over 22 years of experience in child and adolescent mental health, Nicole helps us make sense of what's really going on with today's youth. Let's explore how technology has reshaped childhood, why so much popular parenting advice falls short, and how we can better support kids in becoming confident, resilient young adults. Hi, Nicole. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you guys.
So just to kick things off, could you introduce yourself, your background, who you are to our listeners?
Yes. So I am Nicole Runyon. I'm a psychotherapist. I focused on children for about 20 years. And about 9 years ago, I saw a change in the kids that I was seeing. And I've been on a journey sort of ever since. The change that I saw was some major mental health issues rooted in nothing, no psychosocial issues, no trauma. These were supportive families, intact families. It's not to say that the kids I was getting in my practice, things were perfect, because nothing's ever perfect. And there were certainly things to work on, but nothing that would warrant the extreme mental health issues I was seeing. And specifically, I was seeing a lot of self-harm, panic disorder. A lot of adolescent girls were coming to me out of the hospital from being suicidal and having a hospital stay and then needing follow-up care. And I sort of asked myself, what is happening? How could these kids be so severely mentally ill? And at the time, I had connected it to technology use, early technology use, and how it was infiltrating their development and affecting how they grow and mature, and affecting even their emotional growth that were causing these mental health symptoms. But at the time, nobody was really talking about it. In fact, tech was being celebrated for kids. It was, let's use it for education. They're going to learn so much. This is the way of the future. And so I was really swimming against the grain when I started talking about it. But of course, as we know now, over time, we have gotten actual research and there's more of a mainstream conversation about it. But in those 9 years, I discovered that it really wasn't just the tech. Yes, the tech is absolutely affecting the kids, but it's really become a modality to keep the kids comfortable. And overall, the overarching issue that I've noticed is the culture of our parenting has become so much revolved around making the kids happy and comfortable and not experience disappointment or any painful feelings. And that, combined with the tech, has become really damaging. So I started speaking. I wrote a book about this. And I also completely changed my paradigm in my private practice, where I no longer see the child, I coach the parents. Because I estimated about 70% of the kids I was seeing were kids whose parents needed the help, rather than kids who actually needed mental health treatment. And I've discovered that therapy is really not the way out of this. And in some ways, therapy can make it worse for a kid because they internalize a lot of something's wrong with me and the pathology, and then they overattach to the diagnosis. And at times I've noticed even using it as an excuse to not function. And the adults are sort of all colluding with that. And unintentionally, of course, we think we're doing them a service and a favor, but we're really not. We're actually harming their autonomy and their agency and their ability to be resilient and work through hard things.
And you're the author of the upcoming book, Free to Fly: The Secret to Fostering Independence in the Next Generation, set to be released in May. So what inspired you to really write a book about
I wanted to help parents to feel like they have the answer, that we've deferred to experts, we've deferred to, external factors with our kids. And while it's great to have professionals in place to help us, we cannot completely give our power away to people who don't know our kids as well as we do. Parent is an expert for their child. And that parental instinct and that idea of being an expert for your kid has been eroded over time. And I want to fill that gap for parents. I want to help them know that they have the answer, and I can help you, right? I can give you the psychology, I can give you the child development, and I want to educate parents on that. But ultimately, I want parents to make their own choices about their kids and learn how to connect with their child in a way that they can help the child through a difficult experience rather than deferring to therapy immediately. Because those were the calls I was getting from parents. I would often, it was like triage where I heard the issue and I determined almost immediately that the kid doesn't really need to be here, but you need help, right? And that's perfectly okay, because I call us parents today revolutionaries. We're the first of our kind to be parenting under these circumstances. And we all need help, and we all need the tools to do that. So that's what the book is about.
And I know you've talked about a pattern of things you've been seeing that made you want to write this book, but was there a particular moment and you just thought, oh, I need to document this. I need to let people know?
Yeah, there was a particular moment. I had the book on my sort of list of goals. It was almost like a dream of something I wanted to do later on. And then it was last year, right around this time of year, a little bit earlier, it was in March, Abigail Schreier came out with a book called Bad Therapy, Why the Kids Aren't Growing Up. And it was shocking, right? I mean, she was on all the podcasts and people were talking. There was a huge buzz about it. And she had interviewed quite a lot of research psychologists and social psychologists, but her biggest criticism was that she didn't get a lot of clinical psychologists' opinions. She got some, but not as much as the researchers. And essentially the premise of her book was about exactly what I'm talking about, that the kids should not be in therapy unless they absolutely need it, right? If there's major trauma, if there's something, that's preventing them from day-to-day functioning, there's some cases where it's appropriate, but for the most part, she was arguing that it's actually the parents that need the help. And so here I am as somebody who literally just changed my whole life based on this model. And I'm listening to her on all these podcasts and I'm reading her book and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I have to write my book because I'm coming at it from the clinical standpoint. And I think people need to hear that part of it too, right? Because I was on the front lines of that and I saw that and I very much support that messaging. So I had that sense of urgency to get the book out there.
And if we could just talk for a second about, your journey to becoming a psychotherapist and what kind of got you interested in this field.
So I have known I wanted to be a child therapist since I was 10. And I know that's a very unique thing. Most 10-year-olds, when they say what they want to be when they grow up, it's, they want to be a superhero or an astronaut or something. And of course, they change their mind eventually. But I think it's really always just been a calling for me. And it's something that I couldn't ever see myself doing anything different. And I had a moment with my youngest brother. I was 9 when he was born. So by the time I was 10, I had a thought of, okay, either I'm going to be a child therapist or I'm going to be a pediatrician, because I just wanted to help children. I loved kids and that was what I wanted. So he was a toddling toddler and he fell outside and scraped his knee. And I helped clean it up and bandage it and, take care of him. And the whole time I felt this pit in my stomach. And it wasn't like people say, oh, we get the knees at the sight of blood. I'm actually fascinated by medical stuff. So it wasn't like it was gross to me. It was more, I look back and I think that was an empathy feeling because I didn't want him to be hurt. And it was like in that moment, I realized, okay, I can't be a pediatrician, so I'm going to be a child therapist. And I never looked back. There was lots of opportunity along the way. My family has a family business, and my dad offered me a place in the business when I graduated from college. And it would have been a completely different life. I would have made more money out of college, that's for sure. But I look back and I think there's nothing I could have done that I was passionate enough about than this. And so that's why it's like a calling to me.
Like, what was it about, besides your story with your brother, but about kids and maybe teens and parents, that you just kept like, this is what I want to do?
Well, I always had this philosophy that kids are the foundation of our society and our culture, and whether or not we're healthy and successful. And I wanted to prevent from major issues that I saw in the world or I saw in adults. I grew up in a big family, and when you have a big family, you see some dysfunction. It's just, statistically, you're going to get more dysfunction with the more people that you know. And the dysfunction was on the adult level. And I always knew that the history, right? Like the ancestral trauma. And I could see how traumatic past could affect how you function as an adult, how you parent. And back then, I thought that getting to the kids early and often would help prevent some of the things that I had experienced and with the adults in my life. And it's interesting because I never thought that I would see it differently, but I completely flipped the script. And now I say I help kids through their parents, because now I understand, actually, we have to work with the adults to get to the kids. It was for sure a personal experience. My brothers will often say, it's very obvious why you became a therapist.
And you mentioned obviously like 9 years ago, you noticed this shift. You talked about a suicidal girl, but, what really is this shift if you break it down? Like, what else have you experienced that has changed in kids in the last 9-10 years because of their experience with technology? There's a show out now, I think on Netflix, Adolescents, which talks a lot about social media and things like that.
I think what happened was the kids lost, or never really had, actually. So culturally, we lost the idea of having internal locus of control, and everything, or the majority of things, shifted outward to the external. And so because they don't have those internal ideas that they can work through something hard, that they can do it, that they can build relationships outside of being online, they've deferred to, if we're talking specifically about social media, they've deferred to that as the answer, as the way to feel connected, to belong, to feel like they have people. And, as we know, social media is two-dimensional, right? There's no tone of voice. There's no facial expression, nonverbal communication. It's really hard to interpret things. I've even, I've put my work out there on social media, and I've even had some DMs of people that are misinterpreting what I'm saying, and they're asking questions, and I'm, explaining in a different way. And then we can come to a level of understanding, but we're adults, and we've learned conflict resolution. We've learned how to confront each other and ask each other questions, where these kids are not gaining any of those skills because everything, again, is like external. We're not teaching them that they have the power to work through relational issues. And we're not teaching them the tools to do that, so they don't think they can. And when people feel that sense of nothing inside of them can get through a situation, then suicide is often where they turn, because that's the answer. That's the only way out, is to die in their minds, especially in a young, immature mind.
It's kind of scary. Our generation has had that experience, and the generations obviously before us as well, of understanding how to resolve conflicts and interact with others. Like you said, obviously there's body language, and there's, you can kind of read people, and you can't do that online. It's never a factor when you're developing software, trying to make things easier for everybody, like that. that goes out of your head. And I don't think we've, as a society, really thought about those impacts at all. I guess the question is like, how did we miss that? Like, how do we not pass that to our kids?
Yeah, I think how we missed it is, again, that idea that we've given our power up. We've deferred everything to the external. So what I mean by that is we've allowed big industries, like we're talking about big tech, to tell us what's good and what's good for our kids and what we need. And, the marketing has been all around, this is connective. This is good for us. This is good as a society. We can connect to people all over the world. Like, look, the three of us met through the internet, right? And we've never met in person. And we're having a great conversation and hopefully furthering, helping people. And that's all been positive. But what we missed, Zoe, according to your question, is that we didn't realize that this wasn't for children. So the parents, were told this is good for kids, and also not given any informed consent around what kids are really doing on social media. And so I liken it to drugs and alcohol. We don't give kids a beer and say, hey, you can drink this one beer. It's going to feel really good, but you can't have any more. And that's what we're doing with the devices and the social media. We're giving it to them and we're saying, okay, be appropriate. We're going to teach you some digital citizenship and, don't send nude photos of each other because that's illegal. But their brains are developing and they're very impulsive and they forget all the things you tell them. And that's normal. It's like the same reason why I have to ask my kids 3 times to wash their dishes. Like their executive functioning isn't fully developed. And so we can tell them all day long, hey, don't do these things, but they're still going to do them. And so that's what's missing, is that we're not acknowledging that these are adult tools. And the 3 of us have used it in a positive way. To my knowledge, none of us are using it in a negative way. I'm not going after people in a nasty way. I'm not cyberbullying. I'm really using it positively. And if somebody comes at me with something negative, I shut it down. Don't even engage. But again, I have a fully developed brain. My childhood wasn't disrupted. I developed naturally like I needed to. And these kids are getting none of that.
I came across this article and this study about, which really challenged, I think, my misconception and probably a lot of people's misconceptions about kids these days are not social because they're on their phone. But the misconception and the study showed that they're on their phone, but socializing more than ever. It's just the mode of socialization has changed. So I thought that was interesting. And so that also heightens it, right? The more socialization you have, the more pressure, more negative socialization you get. Just what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's how it's gotten misconstrued, is that, again, the big tech has turned it into a positive, or they've made it sound like it's a positive thing because it connects kids. Also, there's this idea that it helps kids that are shy or have social issues. It helps them to be able to find socialization. And 2 things about that. One, from the big tech standpoint, they're just like any other industry. It's the age-old marketing ploy. Hook them young so you have lifetime users, right? I mean, it's just like big tobacco. All the major big industries have done this. And we really need to look at that critically and protect our kids from big business because they're just in it to profit. And whether or not their intentions were good to start out, I'm not sure. It doesn't so much matter. The idea here is that they're not concerned about the kids. They're concerned about their bottom line. Then the other side of it is that rhetoric of it's positive, especially for kids that have trouble socializing. I actually think that it allows those kids to further withdraw and not work through the hard thing of learning how to have conflict resolution and reciprocity and being uncomfortable and working through that discomfort. So it's not that I'm advocating for changing somebody's personality. If someone's introverted, cool. Nothing wrong with that. However, introverts do have to sometimes live in the world to function. Maybe they have a job where they're surrounded by people and they have to learn how to deal with that. And so I think teaching kids those skills is really important, and we're lacking that because we're deferring to them online. And again, there's that whole positive idea of, oh, they can meet people that they wouldn't otherwise meet. They can find their tribe or find their people. That's true. And in a vacuum, there's nothing wrong with that. But there's not a whole lot of balance with that. Like, we still want to be able to have them be out in the world. Like, I'm at the tail end of Gen X. So in my teenage years, we started to get like Nintendo and video games and things like that. But my memory of it was I would play with my friends or my brothers for like an hour, and then we would go outside or we would find something else to do. And it wasn't the only thing we did. So my thing is like, if you're going to use social media, it should be very limited. However, it's extremely addictive. So it is like giving them drugs and alcohol. We just don't do it. You don't do it, and you wait till their brains are more fully developed, because when you give a child an underdeveloped brain something addictive, they're more likely to be addicted to it later on in life. So the older they are, the more you wait, the more they learn how to have a healthy balance. Because again, the balance comes in when we accept that, this is somewhat positive, but it also can be very dark and dangerous.
It reminds me of when I first got a cell phone, right? So I was in high school, because that was around the time when they were, everybody was kind of getting cell phones. The conversation a lot of parents were having was, at what age should my child have a phone? It's that level of responsibility. Like, yes, something's wrong, they should be able to call me, but do I really want them to have access to the internet free range on their phone, being careful who they give their number to, text messages, that kind of thing? Parents were concerned back then. And I think technology has just improved so much in a very short amount of time, where now, everybody has a phone. Like you said, it's big tech, right? Everybody has a phone, everybody has the internet, everybody has TikTok and Facebook and Instagram. It's just become the norm. And at this point, since it is the norm, how do you kind of go back and separate? Like, how do you, we grew up where, you play video games, you go outside and play though with your friends, or you do other things, you read a book, whatever. Things are very different. So how do we kind of separate kids from technology at this point? We have to have a really good critical awareness of what's going on. So the younger the kids are now, the more there's a product for them. There's a tablet. The tablets are made specifically for 2-year-olds or 1-year-olds even, because they have the protective case on them, and they're colorful. It's all this idea that, okay, your child is 2, they get an iPad. Just like your child is 2, they are gonna, whatever, they're gonna need a pair of shoes for playing outside. It's like an accessory to childhood. And then like if your child is 5, 6, 7, they play Roblox because that's what they do. And then if they're 9, they're gonna get a smart device. And then if they're 11, they're going to be on social media. So we have to really understand that this is all designed to make us think that we have to do it. And what parents aren't realizing is that their 2-year-old with the iPad, it's preventing them from working through the will and authority stage of development, which is a time where they say no, right? And it's hard. It's hard for parents. It's the tantruming, terrible 2s. But they need to go through it, and they need to get to the other side of it, and they're not. Because what's happening is parents are reporting, oh, actually, it's not the terrible 2s at all. It's the terrible 3s. Well, that's because the 2s aren't going well. The parents are scared of their 2-year-old, so they're giving them the iPad for the tantrum. And then the kids aren't working through the tantrum, and they're going into 3, 4, 5, and even the school age years tantruming still. And the parents are like, why are they still tantruming? Well, it's because you didn't hold the space for them to work through it and get to the other side of it and build that frustration tolerance. And so the 2-year-old should not have an iPad. They should be doing what 2-year-olds do, which is getting frustrated and flailing on the floor, even if they're in the grocery store. And the parent has to learn how to work through that with them and accept that that's the stage of life they're in. The thing that's odd to me, because I remember being a kid, we had the internet. I was aware as a kid that my parents didn't police my internet browsing. I knew what I could get away with. I knew what I could experience online. And I was also aware, I mean, I didn't really do the whole because at the time it was like chat rooms and you had some like kind of social games online, but it wasn't to the same extent that we have it now. But that, like, especially if you're a certain age at this point, that that's a thing. So I guess I'm just a little surprised that parents these days seem to be like shocked that that's their child's experience on playing Roblox or Minecraft or anything, because that's always been out there. Like as a kid, I was told be careful in chat rooms. The parents, I feel like they have been around long enough to have that experience. So why is it that they're just letting their kids freely, without supervision, be on like Roblox or Minecraft or whatever, fully knowing that these people most likely also
well, that's
on
just
there?
it. The parents knew that the pedophiles were in the chat rooms. That's very overt. Like that's in your face. The games, the kid games, the things that are marketed to the littles, like even YouTube Kids, the parents think are safe because, again, they've deferred their power to what people are telling them. And that's what big tech is telling them. That, oh, your 2-year-old should have an iPad so they can learn how to read, right? Your kid's gonna be a genius. And they're not creating geniuses. Like the kids who learn how to read early, if they're not actual real geniuses, they eventually catch up. The other kids catch up to them around 3rd grade. So it's all the marketing. And again, the parents deferring their power to the marketing and not having a critical eye on it and not thinking for themselves and not really asking themselves, why is big tech telling me my kid needs to play Roblox or my 11-year-old should be on social media? So that's the problem, is that these things are like Trojan horses.
How do we have the conversation so we're not like minimizing the parents' experience or making it seem... I know when I have these conversations, I sound like a old grudging person who's thinking about the good old days. So how do you balance that? Because parents can see that and they'll shut down. So how do you be critical, but then also be critical of yourself to know that it wasn't the good old days back then too?
Yeah, the thing is there were parts of it that were the good old days, like allowing kids freedom and independence out in the real world and allowing kids to problem solve and, even have more movement, like physical movement, because they weren't in front of a screen. So that's where we could take like pieces of our childhood and say, we can't give that up. We can't let our kids not have that. That's important. So the other side of it is, the newness of tech, the innovation, the excitement. We can teach kids age appropriately all about that. So, my thing is like ed tech has infiltrated the schools and education, not in a good way. They're in every single subject, every single class. The kids aren't writing. There's something to be said about pen to paper. It stimulates the brain. So again, those are the things we want to maintain from our childhood for them. But we could also, in the context of a computer class, like isolate that, hey, like we're going to teach you about tech. We're going to teach you how to type. We're going to teach you how to use PowerPoint and how to navigate an Excel spreadsheet. I didn't learn that. I'm in a class of a generation where I was like in the middle and I didn't learn how to use a spreadsheet. So I barely understand it now. And it would be really helpful for me to know it for my business, right? So like teach them that. Teach them, I wish somebody taught me how to use QuickBooks, for my business. All of these applications and tools that we adults, like I think you said it, Chandi, like you don't know how to use a lot of this stuff. That's the positive that we could provide for them. So I always like to say, like, I'm not a Luddite. I'm not totally anti-tech. I'm just, can we be intentional about it, please? Because we're not being intentional at all. So we can take what was good from our childhoods and then take what's good from this, innovation that we have and combine it. And we would make our kids powerhouses if we could do that.
That's interesting that because I don't think I actually really thought about the fact that, yeah, you're the end of Gen X, so you kind of missed that. So like my brother would be about, I guess, maybe the same age range as you. So I, as a millennial, did learn, like we did typing. That was the first thing. I was like first and second grade. But that was still like, I think it was like a Mac 2. What I mean? It was like a computer with the black screen and just the white type. Like it was still, we learned the typing, and then we played Oregon Trail, and then we played, like the kind of like on, like the not really even online. We played games that were still educational at that stage. And then you kind of third, fourth grade, then it becomes, a little bit more, and you learn how to do research online, and you learn, like, so it was that, like the steps of learning technology in like well, back then, I guess you didn't think of it as like a safe and healthy way, because that was the beginning. You know what I mean? So that's just how you learned it. But I think we need to go back to those like steps, instead of just saying, here's an iPad, watch YouTube videos. Here's, like the steps I think are necessary.
Exactly what it is. Like my 11-year-old they don't use ed tech a ton in her school, but they do some. And I don't know how it came up. I think I was complaining because I had all these tabs open and I was overwhelmed and I couldn't keep track of anything. And she heard me say this to my husband. And she said, "Oh, Mom, I can help you with that." She said, "I learned how to color code and make tab folders." Yeah.
What is the
coolest thing ever? And it's so easy. So she helped me put in a classification, like here's the color of this tab. And then all my individual tabs went into that folder. And now, yeah, it's amazing. It's changed my life.
So now you're color coding tabs.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, that's good. I'm glad she learned that. She taught me something. I encouraged her. I said to her, thank you afterwards. Like, you really made my life easier. So yeah, to your point, Zoe, like there are absolutely ways to make this positive. And I think the millennials are the generation that really got the best of both worlds.
Yeah, because a lot of it we had to come up with ourselves and figure out too along the way. So I think that's where we kind of veered off course, which is like, all right, now we've like broken the code for like how to do a bunch of things, and then now it's easy for everybody. There's no thought behind it for a lot of these kids. They know that they just pick up the computer or the phone or the whatever, and then they can find it. They can do it, whatever it is. For my generation, it was a lot of figuring it out on our own too. There's a lot of thought process. And I don't think the kids have that. It's just readily available. Everything is there for them. So I think that also makes a bit of a difference. That is a really good point, because what you're describing is like you were able to develop those critical thinking skills and decision making and judgment and logic. Those are all things that kids are already going to struggle with, because that's the prefrontal cortex, and that's the last thing to develop, and it doesn't fully develop till 25. So practicing that is really important. And to your point, yeah, now it's so easy. You press a button. It's so user-friendly. They're not having to really learn how to use it.
The concept of families and parenting, it's so complicated and complex. What's one piece of advice that you kind of wish you had before, or just when you started working with families early on?
I wish that I would have made it more of an urgency that the parents had a role in their child's therapy. So, when you work with children, you work with parents. It's inevitable, right? And I was always very clear with parents that I wanted their involvement. And eventually, I was getting parents that were wanting less and less involvement, despite the fact that I was trying to pull them in, because the idea was, culturally, we suddenly had this idea that the kids are mentally ill. There's something pathological about them. It's not because of the family system. It's not because of what they're experiencing in their environment. It's neurological. It's, something we can't control. And I wasn't strong enough in my messaging to the parents that, like, they needed to be more involved. So if I could have changed something I would have done what I'm doing now way sooner.
Your philosophy or your approach has been described as unconventional because it's different than what the norm. So like, how do you describe, your philosophy and how that's different with everything that's happening now, which I guess would be, I don't know if yours is more traditional or...
Well, it's going against the grain. It's going against the status quo, right? And it also, giving power back to the individual means that big industry doesn't profit. When you say, I'm not going to let this happen to my kids, I'm not going to put them on tech, I'm not going to put them in the mental health system, I'm not going to, make them sick and unhealthy, then a lot of industries lose. Big tech loses, big food loses, right? Because nutrition is also a part of this, that, our kids are not moving and they're living sedentary lives, and they're being advertised to on a regular basis from, food that's ultra processed and is marketed as kid food. And parents, of course, because they are tired and burnt out and lack the ability to say no, oftentimes because of that, are just feeding right into that. So big tech loses, big food loses, big pharma loses because they're not in the mental health system on a bunch of psychotropic drugs. And those are three really powerful industries, right? Big pharma. And so when I speak and go against the grain, there's a lot of business out there that could be affected by what I'm saying and what more and more people are waking up to. And then, what they're also doing is they're dismissing moms. There's the Make America Healthy moms. And this is a whole thing of, oh, moms don't know, that's not what the research is saying. And, this is just so maddening to me because it's like, don't you dare come after moms. No one knows their kids better than moms do, not even dads. And sorry, dads, got nothing but love for you, but you're not moms. And mom will be mama bear. And if mom's really connected to their instincts and really knew what was going on, they would not let any of this happen to their children, ever, ever.
How do you go against big business and corporations and this, this research, right, that's really coming from these large corporations? How do you, obviously, yes, people are organizing and having a movement right now. But how does that movement get bigger? How do you actually go against these corporations and companies that are pushing
avenues
this
like
information?
this, where you're letting me say these things and you're not censoring me? Thank you.
You're welcome. No, I mean, it's a good conversation because I think that a lot of people haven't really thought about it.
And that's where it's at, is we need to be having these conversations. We need to, kind of put this information right here, right in the front of people's brains and bring it out. Because once parents know what's happening, once you start telling them, hey, Roblox isn't just a kid's game, then they're not going to let their kids play with it anymore, right? So just a lot of conversation and I think there is a movement. There's more and more people waking up to this. And I think it's just going to unfortunately take time. I wish it didn't have to. I feel a sense of urgency. It's at times affecting my health. I don't sleep at night because I feel like I just have to tell everybody about this. And so it'll happen. The tide is turning. I know more and more young parents who are, even at that tail end of millennial and older Gen Z, they're having kids now. And, they grew up with all of this and they know what it did to them and they don't want this to happen to their kids. So the tide is turning. It's just going to take time and we're going to have to experience more pain before it changes. And that's really hard.
Why do you think it's so critical to focus on this right now? Especially, obviously, you mentioned parents being Gen Z starting to have kids at whatever age, their 20s, I guess, and obviously millennials. I guess, we're used to having that level of independence, right? And especially from a younger age. How do you think they can kind of
I
foster
think
that
that
independence?
requires the adults to limit their media use, because the media is fear-mongering, and they're telling us in their messaging all the time, constantly, that everything is scary. Fear everything. Everyone's going to die. Don't let your kids outside. They're going to get kidnapped. And that's in their ears and in their brains and in their, psyche every single day, constantly, nonstop. You can't escape from it. I go to check my email and there's like scary headlines everywhere. So, that's really about the adults being very aware of their usage and, being more cognizant of connection and talking to people like what we're doing right now. And so you mentioned that you're an auntie, and that really speaks to like the village and the community. So this is an everyone issue. This isn't just a parent issue, right? So if you have a kid in your life, you should know what's going on, because you should help them, foster that sense of independence, and the world isn't scary, and I'm here for you, and I love you, and I support you, because that's what we need.
I remember, in the 90s, everything was also still scary. We had like stranger danger, so everything was scary. It's like, it's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? I don't know. Is there a difference from like the 90s kind of view? I mean, obviously, maybe technology is the one thing that has changed it. Or maybe there's probably other things too. But how did we get to this point where it's so different?
Yeah, you're right. It was there. I mean, I grew up I was more an 80s kid. You guys were 90s kids. And, it was the milk carton. Every day on the milk carton, there would be the missing child. So that was there. But the parenting changed, and that's what happened. The parenting changed in the 90s. So I say the shift happened with kids born in the late 80s, early 90s, because by the time you all were coming of age, like in your teen years, there was more tech. You were talking to your friends through AOL Instant Messenger. You say that like you had a balance, right? And you did, but you had more tech than any other generation, even though it wasn't nearly as much as like Gen Z and Gen Alpha, but it was more. And so what happened is some of the kids started to look less capable because of their use of tech. And when the kids went less capable, the parents went to the extreme of, oh, we got to keep the kids comfortable and happy. And that's when participation trophies came on the scene. We couldn't disappoint kids. We couldn't let them experience the feeling of failure. And then the parenting all of a sudden changed. And it became this give the kids comfort and happiness all the time. And it just kept getting more and more extreme. We didn't learn anything from that cohort of kids. And even when they came into the workforce, your coworkers are Gen Z, and you see a difference between you and them. Well, when the millennials came into the workforce, Gen X and the boomers were like, who are these people? They were entitled, they were narcissistic, they wanted raises and promotions off the bat, right? And that's because the parenting changed in that generation. And still a little bit benign compared to what we're seeing now, but definitely that's when the shift happened.
There's always a comparison, right?
Yeah, sure. And that's normal, right? Like always the older generation is going to be like, oh, these kids today. But that's not what happened. It wasn't as, it was a stark change, and it was dysfunctional. It wasn't like, oh, these kids today. It was like, oh boy, like these kids today, they're not well. Like Gen Z is not well. They're calling in sick too often. They're using, their sick days as mental health days because they just can't deal with life. Employers are at the point where they don't want to hire them at all because they're not productive and they're not functioning well. Many of them don't even know how to make a phone call because they didn't grow up even like having that skill, and they're very anxious about calling someone.
Yeah, I've seen that firsthand. Their understanding of an office setting is very different, and what they think is like acceptable to wear or do or whatever.
Yeah, like looking someone in the eye, greeting them, shaking their hand, opening a door, that social reciprocity has literally not been taught. And I think the adults, we just take it for granted that we just learned it because we had more natural developmental processes in our childhoods. And now we actually have to teach them, and we're not.
And it's a thing, right? Like rates of anxiety and depression and just other mental health challenges are rising among kids and the current generation. And you've mentioned a little bit about this, about how people, how young people and how parents are coping. But yeah, is there anything else you kind of want to touch upon that?
Yeah, I think that the idea that these issues are a pathology is the main problem. So instead of looking at it like our kids are the canaries in the coal mine, that they're telling us something with their behavior, with their mental health symptoms, and what is it that they're trying to tell us, we're just putting a label on them and putting them in some kind of treatment we think is going to fix it, but it's actually making it worse. And so just this idea that like we wouldn't see hardly any of these symptoms if we were more intentional about allowing our children to develop naturally and understanding child development. Like in my book, I explain child development in 4 parts, where it starts with movement, and movement scaffolds the brain for growth. And if the brain can grow the way it needs to, then social emotional growth can happen, and that leads to a connection to self. And it's all very intricate. So if we're missing a lot of that development in our kids, we're going to see what looks like a pathology. But we need to look at that differently and say, okay, well, here, give me that iPad or that smart device and go outside and climb a tree. Because when a kid climbs a tree, then their brain is going to be able to calm, focus, be less impulsive. And then suddenly you're going to see less ADHD diagnoses, right? And when a kid gets independence and is allowed to ride their bikes to their friends' houses and go to the park together without adult supervision, they have less anxiety because they learn how to trust themselves. And they learn, like there's going to be the playground, conflict or the fights or whatever. And they learn how to work through that without adults stepping in and refereeing. And that leads to agency and feelings of power and control over yourself.
In reference to your book, how do you kind of structure it, to kind of get this message across?
The first chapter is called The Mirror. So it's all about parents self-reflecting on themselves, because we all do it. We all project and we parent out of our wounds, and that's natural and that's normal. But we really have to be aware of it, because what we're doing when we do that is we're pendulum swinging from what we didn't like about our childhoods too far in the other direction. So, for example, all of us sound like we had pretty independent, free-range childhood. And that was really great on some level. But I know, at least for me, like that free-range parenting also wasn't really concerned about our feelings. Or like if we had a bad day or we were crying or whatever, like my mom, love her, but she always said, you can't cry unless you have cancer. Like that was her thing. For some reason, you couldn't cry. You weren't allowed to be upset unless you had cancer. So then what happened is, because we were raised that way, we pendulum swung in the other direction, and we're overly concerned about our kids' feelings, and we don't want them to experience any pain or discomfort. And that's too far in the other direction. So somewhere in the middle of like, hey, we liked that independence, that was good, but hey, we also care about your feelings. So talk to us, and we'll help you through it. So I really encourage parents. That's the very beginning of what I do with parents, is encourage them to look at themselves. What was missing in your childhood? What's unresolved? Likely what's unresolved for you is like even at the age that your child is and you're struggling with your parenting with them, you likely had something go wrong in your childhood at that age and it's unresolved. So just that intricacy of understanding yourself. And then I go into child development in those 4 parts, and I explain how movement is necessary and how then I explain brain growth and at the certain ages what kids need so that their brain grows appropriately. And then social emotional growth. And then connection to self is what I would consider like separating from their parents and being independent and gaining agency. And there's 3 points in childhood where kids do that. And that's at 2, 9, and 16. So I go really a deep dive into that. And then I talk about generational differences, like what we talked about, and how that's affected the parenting and how we're not allowing for discomfort. We're pathologizing too much hardship, like we're calling it trauma, and not everything's trauma. And I differentiate like what's actual real trauma and what should be treated that way, like abuse and neglect and domestic violence and a substance abusing parent. And then what people think is trauma, that's not. They're just adverse. I don't mean just, because I don't mean to minimize it. They're adverse childhood experiences that we want to make sure we pay attention to and nurture, like divorce or bullying, things of that nature. But we don't want to pathologize and call it trauma, because kids can work through that stuff. They can get to the other side of that. They can also get to the other side of trauma, but we have to treat it differently. So, and then lastly, I talk about big tech and some of the things that, I mentioned here with like how they've made it really addictive and it's all intentional. And I give parents like some information about like what they might not know, right? Like Roblox being dangerous for kids. Boys are being sextorted, adolescent boys. They're being targeted and groomed through like social media, mainly Instagram. And somebody on the other end is posing as a girl their age, asks them for a nude photo. They send the nude photo, and suddenly they start getting threatened to send money immediately. And of course, these boys don't have money, right? They don't have thousands of dollars that they're being asked to send. And then they end up dying by suicide because they feel like there's no way out. So I give parents some understanding of that. I also talk about pornography and how that is, you think not my kid, but a high percentage of kids are being exposed, many of them accidentally. Like 63% of 11 to 13-year-olds are being exposed to pornography, not even intentionally, because it's just, it's there. Pop-ups come up. Ads are not subject to age requirement. So a nude photo of a woman can come up as an ad for an AI girlfriend through a kid's game. And so things like that, I want to educate parents that they might not know. And then I give a lot of information of what we can do about it, right? Because I don't want it to be all doom and gloom. I want parents to know, like, this is how your kids need to develop. Tech does infiltrate that. And then here are some ages that I recommend introducing this stuff so that your kids can develop. And then just giving parents that power, that feeling like we know our kids and we know what to do and we can do it.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. Big parenting today just seems so complex. A question for you, have you ever had a moment as a therapist where you thought, yeah, I don't even have an answer to that question that like a parent has asked?
Yeah, I mean, sure. Like, I don't know everything, right? But I like to know what are the root causes. So I'm a researcher and I like to dig deep. So if I don't know something, I'm going to figure it out. And one of the things that I've learned, and this is in the book too, is that there's a lot of kids who are reacting to inflammation, basically. So sedentary life, lack of nutrition, a lot of ultra-processed food is causing an inflammatory response in the body, which triggers the nervous system to go into fight or flight. And what we see in a lot of these kids is like behavioral issues, like older kids, like 10, 11, where their outbursts are extreme, violent, throwing things, hurting siblings. And again, no root in anything. I would expect that of a kid with trauma, but no root in trauma. So this was baffling to me. And that was the one time where I was like, okay, I don't know what this is. And they don't respond to typical therapy. Even though it looks like they need therapy, they don't respond well to it. So I started to research like like more of a functional medicine kind of approach to that. And I've actually found some really great people doing this work for kids and specifically focusing on mental health. There's a doctor in Florida. Her name is B.G. Mancini, and her program is called the Family Nervous System. And she helps kids nutritionally and supports them to get out of fight or flight and more into like a more balanced nervous system response. And then the behaviors are dissipated. So this is definitely something that when it first came on the scene, and this was years ago, I had a kid, and the parents were just desperate to find an answer. I mean, they went from doctor to doctor to program, and these kids don't respond to typical treatment. So that was, and that's becoming more and more common.
I guess like in the next decade or so, what do you see as being the biggest challenges in all of this, and trying to kind of rectify, how parents approach their kids when it comes to, whether it's tech or just parenting in general?
I think the biggest challenge is getting this information out there, just because, again, like we said, it's so against the grain and against status quo that I think it's going to take time for people to come around to the idea that the problem isn't what we think it is, and nor is the solution. So just, I think, more and more education for parents.
Have you faced any pushback?
A lot of my colleagues, because, I'm going against the mental health narrative and school, like the education system too, because the schools have felt for some reason that they have to overcompensate for, kids who have social emotional issues. And now they have built into their curriculum social emotional learning. And I don't agree with that. And when I disagree with it, people come at me because they really feel emboldened to that this is their job and they need to help the kids. And it is not their job. It's not their training. They don't understand it. From the actual mental health perspective, they didn't learn that in their education. Their job is to educate. And I don't think that they're doing a very good job with the social emotional learning because they think that the parents aren't just not going to step up and they're not available. And so the school has to be the surrogate parent. And my thing is, no, like that's insulting to parents. Parents need to know this stuff and we need to educate them because once they know, they do better. And I find it very offensive, even as a parent myself, that this is how they view us. And I also don't think that the majority of kids need that from the school because they do get it at home or they can get it at home with the right kind of assistance. I personally don't want my kids to be asked how they feel every day in school because the more you get asked how you feel, the more you ruminate and you think about it. And actually, you probably start feeling pretty bad. And I pay attention to that in our house. And that's something that my husband and I have under control. We don't need the school to do that. On the other hand, I can't teach math after fourth grade. So I need the school to do that. I'm math challenged. And so to me, that's what I'm sending my kids to school for, not social emotional learning.
It's like this weird crossover where the schools try to kind of reach a little bit too far and become the parents a bit. And I've noticed it over the years, and I always said, like, I think parents just aren't, I don't want to say, like, they're allowing the schools to just kind of take over, in a sense. And I don't think they realize, the repercussions.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And that's why, like, my message is to parents, like, don't do that. Don't give up your power to anybody because that school doesn't know your kid even as close to you do. That's how I feel about doctors with my son, who's now 16, but had food allergies since he was a baby. And I knew every sniffle. I knew every hive. I knew, everything about about him and the allergies and his reaction to things and when he was exposed to things and all of that. And anytime I would go to an allergist, that would totally be, railroaded. And they would say, no, that he doesn't have that allergy. And no, that's not true. And you're really telling me that when you eliminated that food, his behavior changed? That's crazy. So it's like, yeah, I had that experience from early on. Like I realized, yeah, it's just me. And it's not that the right practitioners aren't out there. It's just they're hard to find because they're the ones going against the grain and the status quo and the mainstream. And again, it's like it's not parents' fault because we're being told something that is just not true. But it is our responsibility. And so when the schools, say, no, parents, we're going to do a better job, that's wrong. Because what we really need to do is require them to be responsible. And they can be because they love their kids and they just need the right messaging.
Kind of mentioned this about what you want parents and non-parents and just even the general public, because I think your book is for everyone. It's not just for parents, right? Mm-hmm. If you had to choose, one key takeaway that they get from it, what would you want that to be?
I want parents to know that they know their kid best and they have more power than they think. And I want people to acknowledge that internal locus of control are really important. And we've lost that. And we can't give that away forever because we'll be in big trouble if we do.
And what about non-parents?
There's the cliche of the village, right? And there's a reason why we have that, because we need everybody to help raise the next generation, because it benefits all of us if they're healthy. And, if you have any kind of kid in your life, or if you don't even know a kid, it's important for all of us who had the childhoods that allowed us to develop. We talk about it because, and not let ourselves be considered ancient or, oh, you're out of touch or you don't know anything, because we are the last generation to know what it's like to be raised without tech. And we really want to impart that on future generations and make sure they know that it doesn't have to be this way for them. And they can have a balance and they can have both. And I think people who don't have kids often get dismissed. Right? It's like, oh, you don't know anything. You don't have kids. And that is so absolutely not true, because you had a childhood. Your childhood was protected. And that is all you need. Even if you had adverse childhood experiences, even if you had trauma, you still had some of the things that kids need. And we can't ignore that just because people don't have kids. And we need to hear from everybody from that generation.
Yeah, because I think there's like a point of view that you can have, from the outside looking in, that parents are not aware of, right? Because they're the ones, they have the kids, they're raising their kids, but you can kind of see from the outside, like where things
these
might
kids
be.
Who become adults, they become, even if you're not a parent, they could be my colleague, they could be somebody I interact with, right? So it affects all of us, right, in different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, your point of view, though, from the outside, I think you can, it's a different perspective. It's a different understanding. And I think that people should be more open to hearing those different perspectives.
I agree, because you're in a sense like an objective third party, where I've heard parents dismiss people who don't have kids as, oh, you don't understand. Parenting is really hard now. It's what all the kids are doing. They're all on tech. And that is the reason why they should listen to you, because parents are exhausted, right? We're burnt out. We're overworked. We're falling all over ourselves every day to please our kids. And, if you think about, like, it used to just be Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy. Well, now it's the elf for an entire month, and the elf has to move and do crazy things. And then it's the leprechaun, during St. Patrick's Day. And I mean, you basically have to make magic for your kid like every season, or you're the worst parent ever. And it's exhausting. Yeah, I am. Oh, trust me, I am. Yeah, we don't have a leprechaun in our house. Doesn't come to our house.
In reality, a leprechaun coming in your house is not that shit.
No,
That's
it's a little
not really
scary.
a good thing.
It's a little
But that's a whole
scary.
nother.
Yeah.
They're actually supposed to be scared. That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, but parents are tired, and a fresh perspective from somebody from the outside that's not tired, that sees it for what it is, and is in a sense objective. We should be listening. We should absolutely be listening to you, because I will say too, like all the knowledge I have about kids and all the years I've spent doing therapy with kids, I don't have an objective perspective when it comes to my kids. And I look back at the mistakes I've made, and I think, oh gosh, I wish somebody would have put that mirror in front of my face or told me like what I was doing wrong. So yeah, you guys, absolutely. I mean, you might get in trouble from people who are parents, but don't stop doing that.
Yeah, how are you feeling about your book coming out? It's your first, right?
Yeah, it's my first, and it's definitely like a surreal feeling because it's been a long road. It's been almost a whole year to the date, and it's felt like it went by so fast. But then I look back at some times that felt like exhausting and stressful and downright awful, to be honest. It's not an easy process, but it's definitely a good feeling.
I think this is just such an important conversation. And I think, people like you who are pushing against the grain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, trying. I'm not going to give up. It's hard, but, you got to think about it like every major industry has eventually crumbled. It just takes a long time, right? Like I often compare it to big tobacco. It took a long time for that to happen. And then, then big tobacco execs went into big food and made food addictive. So, that's why my message is to parents, like, stop trusting the industries because they don't have your kid's best interest at heart. And you do. And your heart is with them. And that's what they need. So you can get the book on my website, NicoleRunyon.com, under the tab My Book. If you pre-order it before May 6th, you can go back to the site after you've ordered it, put in your receipt code, and you will get access to bonus material that I created. And there's also book bundles on that same website under Book Bundle. And you can order the book in bulk and get bonuses along with that. And, some of the bonuses are a course that I created and group coaching or one-to-one coaching for parents.
Wow, a lot of goodies.
Yeah, it's great.
Yes. Yeah. We look forward to it.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. A big thank you to Nicole for joining us and sharing what it really means to parent in today's tech-driven world. Her insights into child development, mental health, and the changing landscape of parenting are both timely and deeply needed.
To learn more about her work, visit NicoleRunyon.com and don't forget to pick up her book, Free to Fly: The Secret to Fostering Independence in the Next Generation. We'll also have links to it in the episode show notes. Whether you're a parent, educator, or simply someone who cares about kids, this book is a must-read.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Bound by the Cloak. You can find us on social media. We're on X, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok. We're everywhere. And follow us wherever it is that you get your podcasts. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Good Pods. Make sure you spread the word about us. Tell your friends. Let everybody know that you are a huge fan of Bound by the Cloak. We'll be back again in 2 weeks with a brand new episode. Thanks for listening.
Until then.